Dear students, after studying this module, you will be able to know about the significance of penology, the types of punishment theories, the features of traditional and modern penological approaches. Any act or omission of law of the land is known as crime. Evenly, crimes are consequence of several factors and reasons. As Aristotle says, man is social animal. The origin of the punishment is way back since the human inception. There are countless myths and traditions which were followed by the civilized people which are studied under criminology. Criminology is one of the emerging subjects during the 19th and 20th century. It contains an organized set of information and observations of lawbreakers, crimes, and the treatment of lawbreakers. It has many sub-branches which makes this knowledge as academic subject. One of the main branches is penology and correctional administration. Penology is the study of punishments, and the origin of the subject can be traced way back in 1834 by Francis Lieber, a German-American, to denote a system of administrating punishment to the convicted offenders. Before this, the Italian criminologist Cesare Beccaria wrote essays on crime and punishments, which was published in 1764. After this, there was certain focus turned on punishments and their effects on human life. The main works are done by the John Howard, Elizabeth Fry, Mary Carpenter, and Sir William Crofton on prison reforms. In recent times, there is huge turmoil on harsh punishments and abolition of capital punishment. But every society has three reactions, as Siddiqui explains. The first is the traditional reaction of a universal nature, which can be termed as the punitive approach. Further, he says, this type of person is bad and dangerous, and the approach is to inflict punishment on the offender in order to protect the society from his onslaughts. And the second is, the criminal is victim of circumstances. For this, he says, criminal is sick person requires treatment. And the third and final is preventive approach. Instead of focusing the attention on particular offender, seeks to eliminate those conditions which are responsible for crime causation. To understand this, one must go through the defections. Mr. Francis Lieber says penology is that branch of criminal science which occupies itself, or ought to do so, with punishment and the criminal, not with the definition of crime and the subject of accountability and the providing of the crime which belong to the criminal law and the penal process. Dr. P.K. Sen states that penology ought to lay down the fundamental principles to guide the state or sovereign authority in framing of its scheme of punishment, while M.S. Sabnis describes penology to be a body of systematized knowledge of management of penal measures and penal institutions, so designed that a minority among people who dare violates the established norms of individual and social conduct and behavior codified as law by a given society at a given time and place are kept out of circulation for the certain order to enable the rest of society, which is predominantly law-abiding, to constitute its socially useful activity without let or hindrance. Salient features of penology. Crime statistics have been a part of the discourse of the state for over hundreds of years, but the development of statistical methods permits the devising of concepts and strategies that allow direct relations between penal approach and the population. Although crime strategy, criminal procedure, and criminal sanctioning have been influenced by such social utility analysis, there is no explanation on the criminal law that is equivalent to the body of social utility analysis for doctrine of tort law. Nor has stringent accountability in the criminal law achieved anything like the recognition of related no-fault principles in tort law. Possibly because the criminal law is so firmly rooted in a focus on the individual, these developments have come late to criminal law and penology. The traditional sociological criminology has focused on the relationship between individuals and the communities. Its central concerns have been the causes and correlates of delinquent and criminal behavior. And it has sought to develop intervention strategies designed to correct delinquents and decrease the likelihood of deviant behavior. According to the distinguished criminologist Donald Taft, penology is the technique of punishment and reform of criminals. It is the function of the criminology to formulate affections and construction technique to keep and maintain social peace and security. The aims and objectives of these techniques are to suppress crime and criminal. Penology helps in establishing and managing the institution of reforms, probation and correction. Besides helping the reform of criminals, penology also helps in bringing about social harmony and peace. Penology formulates and applies certain collective principles for the reform of society in general, of criminals in particular. Now we shall go with some theories of punishments. First is retribution theory. Retribution is first theory of punishment. Its main aim is the offender should receive as much as pain and suffering as inflicted by him on his victim to assuage the angry sentiments of the victim and the community. The victim plays an important role to punish the offender. This type of practices uses to take place during the ancient and medieval period of times. During those days, there was no penal policies and king was the head of the state. It's much easier to understand when it's put this way, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. Everything was on basis of the revenge and vengeance. Most of the victims used to punish the offenders by themselves. Second theory is of deterrence theory. Deterrent or deterrence means something that deters somebody or something, restrain anyone from taking action, to discourage somebody from taking action, or prevent something happening, especially by making people feel afraid or anxious, making cautions to the offenders that if he commits crime, he would be imprisoned or corporal punishments in public. This creates fear in wrongdoers. Next theory is preventive theory. As Krishna says, preventive philosophy of punishment is based on the proposition not to avenge crime but to prevent it. If a criminal is confined, executed, or otherwise incapacitated, such punishment will deny the criminal ability or opportunity to commit further crimes and prevent the society from that future harm. This theory promotes the punishment to keep the offender away from the society, which will ultimately decrease the criminal activities in the community. Bluntly, it says, keep dangerous person in prison or excommunicate. Fourth theory is Reformative Theory. This theory claims that a criminal can be reformed into a good citizen as law-abider by giving him competent treatment during his imprisonment period. He is in need of a doctor cum guide and not of the jailer. Offenders are treated more like a patient who is suffering from psychological and social problems. He must evaluate his behavior with helps of the experts to be normal person again. Fifth theory is Rehabilitation Theory. The last and the most contemporary theory of punishment is rehabilitation. After serving the sentence, the offender should get back to the society. To live his life with dignity, the prison department and with association of NGOs, they provide them a place in the society. These practices are very necessary to set an example that offender can also relive their previous life without any stigma and pressure. Next is correctional administration in India. Punishing the offenders is the primary function of all civil societies. Prisons are known to have existed throughout the history. Existence of prisons can be traced back to the ancient period. It was supposed that arduous isolation and custodial measures would reform the offenders. In early India, prisons functioned as the principles of custodial care, with the contention that a prison is for confinement and not for punishment. Prisons were concerned merely with holding prisoners while they waited for trial. During the medieval and early British periods, emphasis came to be laid on retribution and deterrence aspects of punishment. In 1836, the first Indian jail committee was formed to report the conditions of the Indian jails. It accounts the real picture of Indian jail, the horrible condition of prisoners and corruption prevalent in staff of the jail, but it didn't make any suggestions for the improvement of the conditions of the prison in whole. Later in 1846, the first central jail established in Agra. The first jail manual was framed in 1870 by the recommendation of the 1864 committee, and the significant changes were the segregation of the male and the female prisoners, adults from children, civil offenders from criminal offenders started to practice. One of the important jail committee was formed in 1919, which completely categorized the criminals on the basis of gender, type of offense and their age. And this committee suggested to work assignment to the prisoners on their ability, and to promote this they provided training, various craft, education to offenders below the age of 25 years. Dr. Walter C. Reckless, the eminent penologist and criminologist, appointed in 1951 by the Government of India to examine the conditions of the jails in India. He recommended changing the old jail manual. In pursuance to the recommendations made by Dr. Reckless and also by the All India Jail Manual Committee, the Central Bureau of Correctional Services was established under the Ministry of Home Affairs in 1961 to formulate a uniform policy and to advise the state governments on the modern methods relating to jail administration, probation, aftercare, juvenile and remand homes, certified and reformatory schools, hostels and protective homes, suppression of immoral traffic, etc. Next is prison reforms in India. These days, imprisonment does not merely mean to grinding milestone or breaking rocks, but the sense has extremely been changed. Certainly, the condition of modern prison system is far better than that in the older times, but then again, still much remains to be done in the direction of prison reforms for humane treatment of prisoners. In India, prison reforms did not materialize out of the social movement, but was necessarily a consequence of the worst conditions of treatment faced by the political sufferers in prisons during the period of their imprisonment. They repeatedly launched protests with the prison authorities and made all possible efforts to see that the rigors of prison life are alleviated and prisoners are humanly treated. The first ever comprehensive study was launched on this subject with the appointment of All India Jail Committee 1919-1920. It is indeed a major landmark in the history of prison reforms in India and is aptly called the milestone of modern prison reforms in the country. Next is contemporary correctional approach. Earlier generations used statistics to draw the responses of normatively defined groups to punishment, but today one talks of high-rate offenders, career criminals, and other categories defined by the distribution itself. Rather than simply prolonging the capacity of the system to rehabilitate or control crime, actuarial classification has become increasingly to define the correctional enterprise itself. The new objectives inevitably permeate through the courts into the thinking about rights. The innovative penology replaces consideration of culpability with predictions of gravity and safety management, and in so doing transforms traditional individual-oriented doctrines of criminal procedure. The contemporary custodial range does not design penal measures for the particular needs of the individual or the community. Rather, it sorts individuals into groups according to the degree of control warranted by their risk profiles. At one extreme, the prison provides maximum security at a high cost for those who pose the greatest risks, and at the other, probation provides low-cost surveillance for low-risk offenders. In between stretches a growing range of intermediate supervisory and surveillance techniques. Next is constitutive penology. Constitutive penology is an extension of postmodernist constitutive criminological theory. Its followers argue that societal responses to crime are interconnected with the wider society, particularly through crime and punishment talk. Broad distinctions are constructed and continuously repeated through penal policy pronouncements, practical actions, discussions in the popular culture, and the proclamations, rules, and practices of institutional structures such as the criminal justice system, correctional institutions, and punishment and rehabilitation. These intellectual distinctions obscure the several ways in which penological discourse and practices invade the varied society. They also disguise the connections between the theory and practices of penology and the impacts, costs, and consequences that these have for societal system. We'll end this module with summary. The present prison system in India was originated by T.B. Macaulay in 1835. A committee, namely Prison Discipline Committee, was appointed which submitted its report on 1838. The committee recommended increased rigorousness of treatment while disallowing all humanitarian needs and reforms for the prisoners. The earlier penological approach held imprisonment, that is custodial measures, to be the only way to control crime. But the modern penological approach has ushered innovative reforms of punishing, whereby the requirements of the community as well adjusted with the best interest of the accused. Dr. W.C. Reckless, a UN expert on correctional work, visited India during the years 1951-52 to study prison administration in the country and to suggest ways and means of improving it. His report, Jail Administration in India, is another breakthrough document in the history of prison reforms. He made a suggestion for transforming prisons into reformation centers and advocated establishment of new prisons. All India Committee on Jail Reforms 1980-83 was constituted by the Government of India under the chairmanship of Justice Anand Narayan Mulla. The committee suggested setting up of a National Prison Commission as a continuing body to bring about modernization of prisons in India. In 1987, the Government of India appointed the Justice Krishna Iyer Committee to carry out a study on the condition of women inmates in India. It has recommended induction of more women in the police force in view of their special role in tackling women and child offenders. The existing statutes which have a bearing on regulation and management of prisons in the country are the Indian Penal Code of 1860, the Prisons Act 1894, the Prisoners Act 1900, the Identification of Prisoners Act 1920, Constitution of India 1950, the Transfer of Prisoners Act 1950, the Representation of Peoples Act 1951, the Prisoners Attendance in Courts Act 1955, the Probation of Offenders Act 1958, the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, the Mental Health Act 1987, the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act 2000, the Reputation of Prisoners Act 2003, and the Modern Prison Manual 2003.